Welcome to Prose and Cons, a podcast by writers for writers, brought to you by Precipice Fiction. Precipice Fiction would like to acknowledge the people of the Eora and Durag nations as the original custodians and storytellers of the land this podcast was created on.
All right, here we are on another episode of Prose and Cons, the Precipice Fiction podcast. So today, the topic that we're going to be talking about is choreography in its various forms. So that might entail a fight scene or, potentially a car chase, and also will extend to sex scenes. So we're going to be having some very in-depth discussions about those specifics.
Mm-hmm.
Lots of fun.
Multiple entendre.
So many entendres. So many entendres. Okay, so before we do that, though, let's see what everyone's been reading and writing.
Do you want to introduce us?
Oh, yes, I certainly do.
Yeah.
So we
introduce us.
Burnham.
Hello.
Paddy Boylan.
Howdy.
Phoenix Raig.
Hello.
And I am, of course, Alex Eldridge.
Of course.
Of course.
So I'll start with you, Ali.
Yes.
Yeah, what have you been reading and writing recently?
The obvious answer of Moby Dick. That's not completely true. I've started reading other things, which is actually bad. I usually like finish something before I pick up something else. At the moment, I kind of have like 3 books on my lazy Susan of reading books. A good friend of mine, Shankari Chandran, has been published by Ultimo Press.
Oh, yes.
Her book, which is Chai Time at Cinnamon Gardens. So I've been reading her book, and it's just delightful. It wants to capture you with this quite whimsical voice because it's setting a nursing home in Western Sydney. So you're like, oh, this is going to be a bit of a comedy on the front, but then it actually is going to hold you down with themes about Sri Lankan diaspora and some quite really serious topics that are handled just beautifully and elegantly.
Awesome.
So very, very excited that it's, a local book is published and it's doing really well. Otherwise, yeah, Moby Dick continues.
Yeah, the hunt for the great white whale continues. Okay, Paddy Boylan, what have you been reading and writing or experiencing recently?
Ooh, experiencing. I like that. Same as Ali, Moby Dick, but also 2 other things as well, because I don't know, you need other things when you're reading the classics. So I'm reading a piece of nonfiction at the moment called Sapiens. It is by, I've got his name here, Yuval Noah Harari, who is an Israeli writer. And it's kind of like the big history of humankind. I don't know if he's an anthropologist or what, but he's trying to tackle like the entire history of the whole human experience from like our evolution through to all the various agricultural revolutions and technological revolutions.
Yeah,
it's very interesting. It's very sweeping in its scope. Yeah, I'm learning a lot. Still in prehistory at the moment, which is
sounds like it's on par with Moby Dick in terms of nonfiction.
It's an epic. It's definitely an epic. That and the manga Berserk, which I've heard very good things about.
Nice.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. It's I need to find a new translation though. Like the translation is really bad and it's kind of ruining the experience for me. Writing, I've just finished the draft of the story that I'll be producing for the anthology that we're writing, because we're all part of an anthology group, and that's coming out sometime in the future. Yeah, that's me.
Cool. Phoenix, what have you been looking at?
Still, well, first of all, I feel like I should start reading Moby Dick or something. It seems like it's what's going around.
It's gonna be the running joke of the podcast.
It really will.
I'm still making my way through Lord of the Rings. I'm almost done with book 2 now. And a couple of weeks ago, actually, me and my partner started it was a reread of Slaughterhouse-Five for me, but we were reading it out loud to each other.
Awesome.
And that was a fun revisit.
It's very good, isn't it?
And then, sorry?
Oh, I just said it's very good. It's one of my favorite books.
It's very good.
Mm-hmm.
And then we just finished watching a sitcom called Schitt's Creek, which I commend for its character development and character growth. It does it so well. Very good payoff, very satisfying. Everything. I watched it in a documentary about the making of it, and someone said it was well earned, and I loved that. I was like, you feel like you earn it, like you get to the end, and I felt like I accomplished what they accomplished. So very good writing in that regard.
That's awesome. I have heard very good things and seen a couple of episodes here and there, and it is very funny, but also like oddly wholesome. So
it's so wholesome.
Yeah, I like it a lot. And personally, I just finished just recently at the gym, because I tend to audiobook a lot of things, The Trouble with Lichen by John Wyndham, who basically it's about if people found the Holy Grail and wait, no, is it the Sorcerer's Stone, the thing to everlasting life or massively extended life. And it wasn't so much about that and what that would look like. It was more about, how are we going to be able to present this to the public in a way that, like, because it's a limited supply, and the way that it won't, like, everyone won't kill each other. So that focused more on the political aspect of it, but it wrapped up quite well. I don't know if anyone's read any of John Wyndham's stuff, but it's very hard sci-fi, but very, very good. That one was a little headier than most of what he does, but thoroughly recommend it. And I also just finished a short story by Robert E. Howard, which I'm actually going to read a piece from his Conan the Barbarian series. And as I said, we're going to be speaking about action choreography sort of stuff. So that does that very well. So that'll be a nice little example of what we're doing. But getting into it, action. I keep saying action. I should say choreography. Choreography in general. In terms of things that happen. So my question to everyone, so we can start, is what is the purpose of action? And I certainly have my own idea of what I think we do with it, but what do we all think? Maybe I'll just round robin again, but I'll go the opposite way this time. So Phoenix, what do you think is the purpose of action in written fiction?
This is honestly something I've never actually thought about before. I've never thought about this, like the actual, like large scale purpose of it.
We can get really deep into the armchair philosophy here, I think.
I've got armchairs like little.
But honestly, right before we started recording, I had to think, like, have I even written what I would consider an action scene before? And I have. I recalled one that was very quick time, and it feels like it's almost like, so if based off of that, if I had to categorize its like purpose, it's like throughout writing, you're basically expanding and contracting time based on the importance of events. If you're recounting a large amount of, like on a large scale, you're covering large chunks of times, and you're more so, I don't know, you're kind of dialing it way out. You have room to play. But if in a particular moment, the details become very, very important on a very fine-grained level, you kind of need to zoom in and the action becomes closer together. So it's a way of delivering like bullet time in the moment events. When your character's senses need to be dialed way up, when your character needs to be aware of everything that's going on, which is not always the case.
Totally.
And very rarely, I would actually say they need to be aware of everything on that fine of a grain. Otherwise, it gets too bogged down and it's way too heavy. So sparingly, it's really great to bring the reader right into the breath of the moment, like right into the like breath by breath, beat by beat moment, and show that it is possible.
Damn, that's good.
Yeah.
And I've honed in on your word show, Phoenix, because when Alex threw that bomb of a question out, I genuinely had to sit here and be like, how would I answer that? Because being screenwriter first, I really struggle to separate action from story in my brain. So
what do you mean by that? Separate action from story?
Well, it was just when Alex asked, he's like, what's the purpose of action? Why have it? And I'm kind of like, because you don't have a story without it. Like my brain started like not working because I'm like, what do you mean? It's a story. Does not compute. And I took a step back while Phoenix was talking to be like, well, why did I have that mini meltdown? And for me, it is the very overused sense of show don't tell, isn't it? For me, action is the show. It is ideas actualized. So in the same way, a novel needs to be equal part ideas, and then it needs to be then demonstrated through action and kind of whatever the healthy mix of that back and forth is. I think some genres, the promise will be weighted towards more action, less on the ideas, and then other genres will be more ideas heavy, less on the action. But I think there always needs to be that sense of idea introduced and then the demonstration of action, of the idea in motion.
Yeah. Based off of that, it's almost like you could say the opposite of action would be exposition, like straight exposition.
Yeah, that's a good spectrum to think of it of. Like my personal interpretation of it is, and I love that we're all getting such different ideas from this, because I have definitely one specific thing that I'm like, this is what it means to me. Personally, it's really, really easy for me to get bored by action. So I'm trying to think why exactly, but basically if things start exploding, I've got maybe 30 seconds where I'm really engaged. Like, for example, the car chase in Batman recently was one of the very few moments when I can think, no, I'm actually on the edge of my seat for every part of this, which is pretty rare for me. It's like, I do like car chases, to be honest, but yeah, I tend to find I have a very limited amount of time that I can pay attention to action before I start drifting off. But characters talking, for example, I can watch for hours. I can watch a whole movie just people like chatting. Like Birdman, for example, I was just absolutely hooked every second of that.
Birdman.
Yeah, love it.
So good.
So for me at least, and I don't think this is a universal, I think this is just a personal thing. For me, I like to approach any sort of action or choreography as a payoff, as sort of a release for this build-up of tension that's happened, which is not so different to what you said, Phoenix, in terms of the dilation and contraction. So, things expand out and the tension builds and builds and builds, and then it sort of sucks into one moment. And I mean, look, in obviously in relating a sex scene, that's about as literal as that can be.
Well, yeah.
But yeah, it is a release of tension in a sense, is how.
Well, I super jump in here. I hope that's okay, because I love thinking about sex scenes and fight scenes as quite parallel, not so much in craft tools, but in the idea that, so I've grown up watching a lot of shonen anime, and also a lot of like WWE wrestling. And I mean, I hope you guys can vouch, but I actually pride myself on my fight scene. I really enjoy writing my fight scenes. And I think I write okay fight scenes.
Yeah, they're clear, which isn't always a given.
Yeah.
I clearly know what's going on, and that's, I have an example of where that doesn't work, but sorry.
but this idea of the build up and release is basically the entire arc of what a shonen anime, like its story engine, runs off.
What is shonen? Sorry, I keep interrupting you as well.
So shonen is defined by the age group, which is more the younger male fans of anime. So like anime likes to divide itself into a quadrant, being like young male, older male. I'm going to forget all the specific names, but shonen is the young male. That's probably the genre that's transported to the West the easiest, because that's our superhero genre a little bit. So we absorb that really well. But basically that's the genre that you're going to get a lot of fight scenes, and it is built structurally about the idea of you're going to set up a bad guy early, and you're going to have an entire season that's going to build up to the promise of the fight scene. The fight scene is going to be beat out potentially over many episodes, in that the fight scene will have its own inherent turning points and structure. And I can't tell you how much I love that and love being able to replicate that in literature. And it's the same reason why I love wrestling so much, because to me that like it's a choreographed fight, and it is this dance, but it has inherent story beats. You have hour-long wrestling matches. So like, how do you achieve that? Is because it's hanging on narrative thread. So you've had like weeks and weeks of build up of why these two people are in conflict. And the audience comes in knowing what their special move sets are and whether or not they've been leveling up in their skill sets. This is also like an anime trick as well, that you go on the journey for them to level up. Usually their leveling up is also tied to their emotional, like if they have an emotional lack they need to solve, they can't level up until they solve the emotional lack. Then they get a power up, then they can go into the fight. Sometimes that happens during the fight, but wrestling does the exact same thing. And then it's just that long build up and release. And I wanted to segue that into what I've been writing at the moment. I haven't actually been writing a fight scene. I've been thinking more and more about sex scenes and how they parallel that in your more dedicated romance genres, not a sex scene that would just happen as a stylistic, gratuitous element of another genre. I don't know why I immediately thought of like a crime novel that might want to have like a grungy sex scene, but that's more of a set piece rather than a narrative build up and release.
True.
So I'll end my rant shortly. But in my historical fictions, the first book I have a couple of fade to black sex scenes because I never really wanted to go there creatively, and I never actually felt the narrative reason why it would be justified to go there. I'm like, the audience, the knowledge that is a sex scene is enough. Nothing is going to happen on the page that's actually going to change character or story, so I don't need to write it out. I've only recently had a crack at like writing a sex scene for that series, and it like on the page, and later I can talk about kind of the craft of how I tried to go about that and teach myself that. But the reason I thought that one was justified as opposed to the fade to black ones was because this is like 40K words in the making. Like it had been structurally embedded in the build-up. It would almost be like breaking the promise I had made to the audience if this one wasn't followed through with, as opposed to the other ones, was my logic.
I mean, it's an interesting point you make about because when you when you approach sort of a shonen and then like a romance novel, look, whether that is a steamy or more a cozy, what's the other term, like cozy or classic or like sweet romance.
Sweet.
So I've read a few of them because my girlfriend's like pushed them on me, and I've been like, fine, I'll have a go, I'll give it a crack. But you're right. There's that parallel of the tension that goes up. Obviously, on one hand, it's sexual tension. On the other hand, it's the tension of, oh, is he going to be able to, like, are they going to fight? Are they going to kiss? It's literally that parallel between it.
I love that parallel so much.
Yeah. So it's an interesting sort of like it's basically just two maybe inverse demographics, like, you know, like I don't know, maybe well, I guess the opposite of, I'm trying to think in terms of the anime quadrant. But look, basically people reading an action-based book, you know, which would be, let's say a superhero thing, and then a sweet romance, they're probably going to be the same age demographics. And essentially they're these two arcs that are sort of paralleling there. So yeah, no, I just think it's an interesting, interesting parallel to make there. And I think it's quite valid. Paddy, you haven't said much. What do you make of all this?
I said a lot of and interrupting Ali.
Very well timed.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, when I thought action, I immediately thought fight scenes. Like I suppose everyone did. I suppose action can be anything that's, I said kinesthetic before. I'll say it again because it's a lovely word. I think there's something really, like the first stories were physical. I think there's something really primal to both fight scenes and sex scenes and action. It's storytelling without words. I think it's powerful because, I'm getting kind of philosophical here, it's innate and deep and kind of animalistic and almost primal. When we read a fight scene, I think it speaks to, there's like the life and death struggle that's immediately there. Like the stakes are never higher than when there's a car chase and there's a chance of death, or a gun battle and there's a chance that someone's fought. So it's powerful immediately in that sense because it's the most important thing we can experience. You know, like we're being chased by the lion in the savannah at that point. You know, it's gonna always make our adrenaline rise and our interest immediately switch on. I guess same with sex. Sex is the other side of physical action. We're talking about like exposition and sex as kind of opposites. I almost feel like it's a triad. You've got dialogue, you've got ideas, and then you've got action. And all of these tell stories in very different ways.
Yeah, no, that's interesting that you bring it back to a craft way of how to actualize the action. So in prep for this sex scene I wanted to write, I kind of away and asked myself, what are some sex scenes I've read in literature that I actually liked? Like, we know about all the notoriously terrible ones on the internet. Like, I'm pretty sure there's a prize, like an award out there that will like have a short list of the worst sex scenes in literature
I only
released
learned about
every
this
year.
recently.
It's amazing and eye-opening.
Oh, that's phenomenal.
And unfortunately gendered. I'll let you guess which gender's responsible for writing some of the worst sex scenes.
Breasted boobily. Has anyone seen that?
No.
It's like a male writers. I think it's a Reddit thread. Male writers writing about female. Anyway, it's just that's the tagline.
But yeah, so I went away and did some research, and a book I absolutely adore is called Swords Point by, I believe it's Ellen Kushner. We'll make sure I check that when we put our details up. But that has an absolutely beautiful sex scene in it, because it actually takes a step away in that it's not, blow by blow in terms of like an action sense. It actually kind of, yeah, thanks, Alex. He's done like the drums da-dunch for people who are just listening. But it wants to be a bit more metaphorical. It wants to kind of talk about sensations and feelings without actually being too descriptive in what's actually happening. Like, you don't get us to the environment. Like, it's in writing, we're often told we need to like ground the audience in the moment, make sure they can, visualize the room, feel the room, see the room, like you're in the location, the choreography of the moment. But this sex scene it stripped it all back to do the opposite, in that it was just focusing on sensation that wasn't necessarily tied to action, thoughts that weren't necessarily tied to action. And so you just got this wonderful impressionistic sense of the sex scene, which is almost the opposite of what we said was the difference between exposition and action. If we're justifying sex scenes as choreography, it was this wonderful sex scene that had very little choreography.
That's
more
clever,
abstracted, was it?
because it also kind of PGs it. Like, I think, at least me, one of the things that would make me steer away from writing a sex scene, and I never had, would be, would an audience that doesn't want to read a sex scene be immediately turned off by this? Because it's taboo. Like, there's almost nothing more taboo. But if you just write about the experiences and the sensations, you can write the full breadth of the sex scene without ever having to mention a dick.
Exactly. And I enjoyed this experience much more than I've written one for a screenplay once before. And craft-wise, screenplays don't give you access to emotions and thoughts. You're only describing literally like, this happens, it looks like this happens. So I've tried to write a screenplay sex scene, and that, in terms of like a writer getting something out of that, wasn't a very enjoyable experience. I'm like, how do I make this sound not dumb and awful on the page and communicate? Like, I know once it's filmed, it could look quite elegant, what I was trying to do, but it's always, to me, going to sound real silly on the page. What I'm trying to describe, bodies being where, and it was, I didn't enjoy it. Well, I think that's why I wanted to have a crack at this other. I wanted to challenge myself to try and level up, because it felt like a much more poetic technique than I'm used to writing. I feel like I write quite spare prose most of the time, is my natural style. I'm like, no, I want to try and write this kind of indistinct impressionistic sex scene, and that was like a writing challenge I gave myself.
Nice.
Well, that's a good thing to bring up, like the ability to write something that is heavily action oriented in more of an impressionistic or abstracted sense, and when that would be appropriate, and when it would. I imagine that I would be imagining that would be a, maybe not a common tool, but more common in, say, literary fiction, because it does lend itself to that sense of, well, this is going to be artistic and maybe a little more impressionistic, and it's more about the words than necessarily like getting every specific action down. So I imagine, is the book you're describing, is it more in the literary fiction vein, or?
It's it gets lumped in with fantasy, even though it technically doesn't have any fantasy elements. It's just because it's like secondary world historic, like medieval. You know how some people just lump those fiction books that it's like, oh, it's a fantasy setting, even though there's magic in this world. So it's called Swords Point, and it's all about upper class duels. So there's lots of dueling action as well. This book is actually another great example for some well-written fight scenes. Because of that, I think it has been given a lot of praise for being like a higher literary example of that genre than is common.
Yeah, and that's an entirely different conversation, you know, talking about the literary ghetto that our respective genres sort of fall into by default. It's like, oh, it's not of this world. Oh, it must be a bit shitter than most of the other stuff. And it's like, okay, well, you know, I feel like that ghettoization, as certainly as self-publishing expands, is but anyway, that's an entirely different topic. Yeah, but
it's sounding. Sorry, I completely just started talking over you. Go ahead, Alex.
I was just going to say, can we think of any particular choreographed scenes, action scenes that we've written that we are particularly proud of, that, you know, exist, that we'd like to describe as good examples of how to effectively choreograph something?
I can think of an example that I thought went well, and it was recently for the story that I'm writing for the anthology, and listeners, we're all giving each other feedback, which is a wonderful process. Having like a circle to get feedback from, really good. So this scene is a scene of violence, and it's really one-sided violence. It's one side is basically committing a massacre against another. And I wrote it deliberately in a way that was quote unquote passive voice. So it was like almost quite detached from the action. It was almost describing the violence as happening, rather than the character. It wasn't describing the characters having violence done to them so much as the violence being done to the characters, and not violence being done by a character, but just violence is inflicted. I don't know if that makes any sense, but I'm just going to keep bumping.
Yeah. As opposed to the individual characters themselves being like his flesh was just because of the perspective thing. I get what you mean.
Yeah. And the thing I had in my mind while I was writing it is, going back to anime, you know when there's like a sword fight in anime and the screen will suddenly cut to like black and you'll see like a slash of red across the screen. Yeah. And it doesn't show the samurai actually cutting the guy in half. It just shows the impressionistic slash marks, which somehow is more powerful. It makes the slashing itself the subject.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I wrote the scene and
some
of the feet.
Almost
Why?
Well, you finish. I'll say it. But
and some people are like, yeah, I get it. Like there's no fight to be had. This is just a slaughter. Like I get why you're using that. Some people are like, don't use the passive voice. It's it robs the characters of their agency. All of the reasons why you wouldn't have passive voice. So that was my experience. Not sure what to make of it.
But so the reason I got excited when you said the samurai slash is because that's literally the image I had in my mind when I was thinking to an action scene I had written, which I just recalled a different one. It's not characters fighting, or it's not conflict in that way. It's actually a short story I wrote where the character transforms multiple times, and anytime they transformed, that's a very blow by blow moment. And I wanted to do it in a way where I'm not specifically calling out like, and then their arm did this, and then their leg did this, because I was like, that's so boring, and like it's like itemized and it's not actually going to come off well. I want to capture the sensation of transforming and what that would feel like. And the image that came to mind like I also compared it to anime action, was when samurais are fighting and they go by, and it's not so much what you said with the black screen and the slash, but I pictured when they pass each other.
Yeah,
and they're
there's
both
that
like
moment
their
where
swords
nothing
are.
happens.
Yeah, there's that moment where nothing happens, and then you see the result. It's almost like that's kind of how I went about it, by saying like I described the way the world warped around them, and I described it how their perspective shifted, and then I revealed what had happened to the reader after it had happened.
Yeah,
and that's
almost
how
like
I went
focusing on the moment that is that. Like the characters are almost less important to the self-contained moment that is the swords crossing each other.
The violence becomes the character itself, or the change.
Yeah, I really dig that.
Yeah, no,
Mm.
I love that as an example because I was trying to sit here and think of so we talked about like the impressionistic sex scene. Is there an equivalent of the impressionistic fight scene? So
Yeah.
I love that
Mm.
you've both written that, and I was trying to think of I've seen it done in like I feel like big battle scenes in high fantasy will do this with the lens if they're trying to imply like a long arduous ongoing battle, it becomes less blow by blow and it will zoom out to focus or actually zoom in potentially really tight on just how the character's feeling exhausted, just small minor cuts without explaining where the cuts have come from or what's happening. Suddenly they're in the mud because they've fallen over. Like it'll go for this very disorientating sense of not actually explaining the action in great detail. But then when it comes to a boss battle, there is almost the, again, promise to an audience that you are going to get more of the this, then this, then this, then this. I'm trying to think of, I think Brandon Sanderson does this really well. He'll do both the larger, like not honing in on detail version, as well as then when we get a boss battle, we will get the very fine tune action. Every beat is beated out and explained. And I get a joy from writing that kind of scene. So I know I've talked about Majesty before. But if Matan was here, he could be my cheering squad, is basically what I was getting at, because he knows I've got these 4 big fight scenes. But I think you've all maybe heard my opening fight scene, which is that same style of it is very this, then this, then this. And I think when done well, that can really work. And it's I guess it's always a taste thing. Someone may sit down and read that and they're like, there's a lot of detail. This is off-putting. And I guess that's why I put it as my opening chapter, because I'm like, this is the genre this book is. So if you're not a fan of, fight scenes being the narrative, this is probably not going to be the book for you.
Is anyone else thinking Dragon Ball Z during all of this?
Absolutely.
Because like fighter's narrative, like
that's the
chef's kiss, it is the
shonen
pinnacle.
narrative, I'd say, at least in the Western world. I'd say. What I was going to say about also about the short stories, part of the compilation that we'd done, was it is very much the opposite of that. Like the action scene, it's this one thing where like it's a zombie story and these kids have to get from one end of a tunnel to the other end of a tunnel. And you guys have all read it multiple times, but for the audience, there's this one scene where all like they basically the kids have to go across this chasm essentially where it's like, we have to run past the zombies. So it's like essentially a game of hide and seek for a second. And then it gets to the last one and I really zoom in on his specific journey over it. And I think it goes for about a page and it's just like every step he takes, every breath. And it's action, but it's like that tension building action. And then funnily enough, when the actual spoiler alert, when he gets got, basically it does then become a little bit more abstract and impressionistic because there's just limbs going everywhere and blood. Like I think I use like this phrase, a geyser of blood, which in retrospect seems a little gratuitous, but Ali, you seem to like it.
It's a fun phrase.
You lent in. It was good.
Yeah, thank you. But yeah, at that point when everything's going higgledy-piggledy and you can't quite make it out because the character's back there, it then does sort of zoom back and become more of a melange of just craziness. Yeah, so I guess that's two versions of those different things being sort of interspliced. Sorry, so Phoenix, were you going to say something?
I was going to say it feels like it comes down to you have to be honest on what you've deserved. Like if you come in, because it's like action is a really powerful tool to bring readers in, but it can also be very exhausting because if you're reading blow by blow, you can't do it for very long. Like which I actually like the parallel because it's like a battle is exhausting to read as it is to fight. Well, I've never been in a battle, but I imagine. But so it's like, if you're starting off, if it's unearned, heavy blow by blow, the reader's going to get disinterested. Why do I care? Why do I care about every step this character's taking? So if like you haven't done the work to set it up and create the tension, then it's not time for an action scene. It is a release that needs to be set up. Yeah,
exactly. That was exactly my point at the beginning, was it really has to be earned and it really has to be deserved. Otherwise it's like, what's going on here? Like if you got like a 5-page fight scene, I mean, depending on different things, it might it can be exhausting. I think, guys, it's probably time to move on to the reading, unless anyone has anything else.
So much more I want to say, but
There's so much to say.
Right, we almost need a episode 2.
Yeah, maybe we could part 2 this.
We can part 2 this, yeah. This could be a thing.
It just got part 2'd.
I wanted to squeeze in one example because I'm currently watching it at the moment. It's an anime called Haikyuu, and it's all about volleyball.
Nice.
And the reason I wanted to bring it up because it's an
anime.
example of action shonen that isn't fight scene, but it will do 10 episodes of a single volleyball match.
Oh my gosh.
I want you to comprehend the level of plotting detail that goes into creating all turning points and emotional beats for one volleyball match. It is a masterclass in pacing. Like my household's been watching it, and it'll do that really rude thing where it ends on a cliffhanger every time. So we watch 4 episodes, like we watch not 4 episodes, 4 hours of volleyball an evening. Like it is so binge worthy. Just because you're like, I don't know if he's been practicing that dig technique. I can't go to bed until I know he succeeds in digging the ball up against that one asshole he's been making eye contact with. Like the stakes are so simple because it's like win the volleyball match, lose the volleyball match. So it doesn't even need to spend time setting any of that up. It's just all character and it's all action. So I highly recommend Haikyuu.
Awesome. I incidentally, with that little technique you said of like, ending on a cliffhanger, which I read a book recently, there was a haunted house thing and it did it every single chapter. And yeah, it's annoying, but I call that goosebumpsing because it's like, that's how every Goosebumps book chapter ended, like every single time, which is fair enough because it's for kids, but like, yeah,
it works. When it works, it works.
Yeah, true. If it's used sparingly. All right, cool. I think I might jump into it if no one else has anything immediately they want to say. I'm sure we all have more things. But yes, this particular reading is from the Conan the Barbarian series. You may have seen the movie with Arnold Schwarzenegger, which is pretty fun. This is based on it's essentially a series of short stories, and people kind of whinge about his writing being a little bit over the top and gratuitous and lots of adjectives and things. But you'll see what I mean. Just the excitement and enthusiasm in it that you get from it. And this is specifically a fight scene where people are invading King Conan's bedroom to try and kill him. You'll kind of get a sense of how well he's able to thread that enthusiasm into this action. So, the king glared, puzzled as to their identity. Ascalante he did not know. He could not see through the closed visors of the armored conspirators, and Ronaldo had pulled his slouch cap down above his eyes. But there was no time for surmise. With a yell that rang to the roof, the killers flooded into the room. Grommel first. He came like a charging bull, head down, sword low for the disemboweling thrust. Conan sprang to meet him, and all his tigerish strength went into the arm that swung the sword. In a whistling arc, the great blade flashed through the air and crashed onto the Bosonian's helmet. Blade and casque shivered together, and Grommel rolled lifeless onto the floor. Conan bounded back, still gripping the broken hilt. "Grommel!" he spat, his eyes blazing in amazement as the shattered helmet disclosed the shattered head. Then, the rest of the pack were upon him. A dagger point raked along his ribs between breastplate and backplate. A sword edge flashed before his eyes. He flung aside the dagger wielder with his arm and smashed his broken hilt like a cestus into the swordsman's temple. The man's brains splattered into his face. "Watch the door, 5 of you," screamed Ascalante, dancing about the edge of the singing steel whirlpool. That's amazing. For he feared that Conan might smash through their midst and escape. The rogues drew back momentarily as their leader seized several and thrust them towards the single door. And in that brief respite, Conan leapt to the wall and tore therefrom an ancient battle axe, which, untouched by time, had hung there for half a century. With his back to the wall, he faced the closing ring for a flashing instant, then leapt into the thick of them. He was no defensive fighter. Even in the teeth of overwhelming odds, he always carried the war to the enemy. Any other man would have already died there, and Conan himself did not hope to survive, but he did ferociously wish to inflict as much damage as he could before he fell. His barbaric soul was ablaze, and the chants of old heroes were singing in his ears. So that gives you a
Oh yeah, that's like violence porn.
It's violence.
Wow.
Best. It's just so gratuitous in the best
As the
way.
shattered helmet disclosed the shattered head.
Brain splashed up onto his face. It was just
Yeah, the
it's so
12-year-old boy in me actually really likes this.
Yeah, I know,
I
I know.
really need to read Conan.
It's totally over the top, but if you can lean into that and be like,
Oh yeah, easily.
fun. I just read it and within like a couple of pages. I was like, oh yeah, I know what this is about. So that's that. I guess we can finish off with our quote then, and I believe Ali Burnham was going to read this one.
I have a quote here about writing sex scenes. Oh, how is my internet? Sorry, before I begin.
Okay.
It's okay.
Very good. That I found both amusing and potentially insightful. It comes to us KM Sonine. Sorry if I've got that wrong. I have even taught classes on writing about sex, and I've looked closely at different writers' sex scenes. On the level of craft, I've given it a lot of thought. The pitfalls are simple. It can sound clinical or medical, which isn't right, or pornographic because the characters disappear. That was a really good way of kind of the two spectrums that a sex scene could fall on.
And it can happen the same with regular action as well. You know, something can be too clinical and too blow, and you're like, his sword tilted slightly to the left and went into the bottom rib, and you know,
too medical. And we also know what a pornographic fight scene reads like as well.
that was probably pretty close, but I don't know. I still enjoyed that. Cool. All right. Well, I think that'll do us. We can wrap it up. I don't think we really have a closing thing. I guess the quote's meant to be the closing thing, isn't it? But no.
Social media. Does any of us have any social media they want to plug? I don't.
I have been doing a bit of stuff on Reddit recently under the name The Eldridge Horror. So if you're interested in reading some horror stories, have a look at that.
ELDRIDGE.
Yes. The Eldridge, like Eldridge, but Eldridge Horror. And all one word, all under there like that. And look out for our anthology. By the time this is out, it will probably be getting pretty close to the release date, I imagine. So yeah, that's exciting. Other than that, guys,
our socials and website will be live, so make sure to sign up to our newsletter so you'll be posted on details about when the anthology is coming out.
Yes.
All right, signing off.
Yep.
Bye-bye.
Goodbye.
Okay.
We'll nail it one day.
You're listening to Pros and Cons, the Precipice Fiction podcast.